Welcome everybody to today's lecture. Today I'm going to be talking to you about how to search for academic literature. In particular, I'm going to help you to search for academic literature via online databases that the HAVIA subscribes to, and also via specific journals. So by that I mean specific management and business journals. Okay, so what I'm going to talk you through is a series of techniques, hints, tips, and also give you some knowledge as to how to plan your search in advance, how to identify relevant material. So for example, I'll explain what I mean by high quality peer-reviewed academic sources. And then I'll also talk you through some strategies as to...
Ja, is voor mijn zus.
If you could just mute your microphones, guys, please, when you join. Sorry, guys. Whoever's on mic, can you check if you're on mic, please, and mute? Excellent. Okay, sorry for everybody watching the video. So yeah, that's what I'll be talking you guys through today. Keep in mind there are also materials that are available online already in Semester Plan and also on OneDrive once you're registered in the Team Talks this week. And I'm going to flag these up later over the course of the lecture, okay? So this is what I'll be working on with you guys today. So this is what we call the literature search cycle. So as you can see on the left-hand side, there are 5 elements that go into literature searching and using academic literature in any kind of writing. So there's the planning stage, the identifying stage, the search stage, the evaluation stage, and also the management stage. So in particular, I'll be talking to you about the first 4 of these stages today. That's planning, identifying, searching, and evaluating. Okay, so I'll be showing you how to plan your literature search in advance by defining relevant keywords on leadership or business practices. And as I'll say in a few moments, that's something that I'm going to ask you guys to do for some homework for Friday. It's already mentioned in Semester Plan, but I'll talk you through what that looks like in a little moment. I'll also show you how to identify key resources for your CP. So I'll talk to you about what are relevant sources, what kind of sources we're looking for here at CCBS. And I'll also talk to you about how I want you to put some of those together for the Bibliography Academic Summary tryout on Friday. I'll also show you how to search for literature on the country that you're studying by using a range of search tools. So this is things like Boolean strings, but I'll also show you all the different features that are actually available via academic databases and journals. So I have to say, databases and journals in 2021 have incredible tools on the websites themselves that help you to narrow and refine your search. And I'll show you some screen shares of this later. And again, keep in mind, there's also a tip clip, which is available via Semester Plan already, where I talk you through in a much more condensed sense, kind of step-by-step guide as to how to actually use some of these databases that HAVIA subscribes to. So I just want to briefly introduce the task that we're asking you guys to do for Friday. So that's Friday midnight. This is from Semester Plan, so you should all have this in front of you already and will have perhaps already seen it. So what I'm going to ask you guys to do is for each team is to identify 3 relevant academic peer-reviewed sources on leadership in the country that you're studying. So by academic peer-reviewed sources, that means we want to see papers that have been published in academic journals that are available via the HAVIA databases or are available via specific academic journals. So we ask you to use these sources because it means the quality checking and evaluating of their quality has already been done by fellow academics. So it's quite a democratic process in order to get published. Other academics have to deem your work to be accurate, to be reliable, and to be based on sound scientific inquiry. So one of the ways in which we guarantee that the work that you use is also of that quality is by asking you to access these journals and databases. So remember, what I'd like is for you to find, download, and save PDF versions of 3 academic papers for each team. Okay, so not for each member of the team, just for each team. And what we'd then like you to do, and I'll show you this at the end of the lecture, is we'd like you to upload this in the bibliography folder on OneDrive. You'll all be getting registered on OneDrive this week, of course. Then what I'd like you to do is I want you to read through, and you don't have to read through the whole paper. Keep in mind, I'm realistic at this stage. Scan through the introductions, scan through some of the beginning of the paper, and also the conclusions of the papers, and just write 2 or 3 sentences about what that paper says about leadership skills or practices in Botswana, Ghana, Switzerland, Austria, or whatever country you're studying. So just think of it as a friend asks you, what are you reading? And you say, oh, I'm reading this paper about leadership in Ghana. And they go, oh, okay, what does it say? That's all we're looking for. 2 or 3 simple sentences that say, these are perhaps the research methods that they used. Maybe the researchers conducted surveys, interviews with leaders and managers in organizations in Austria, for example. And just summarize 1 or 2 key points that come from the paper. Do they say that organizations, for example, in Austria are incredibly formal or incredibly informal? Do they show some concrete practical examples to illustrate the ways in which they're formal and informal? For example, do they say that lower level employees are not allowed to speak directly to their superiors, for example? Do they cite other examples, such as perhaps leaders having designated parking spaces, designated seats in the organizational cafeteria, that also suggest a very formal environment? So it's just a very short task, but we just want you to write 2 or 3 sentences in a Word document, upload that Word document into your team's OneDrive folder, and next to that have 3 PDFs of 3 academic papers written about your country. And then also, and I'll show you this later, just a single page that lists the bibliographic details for those 3 papers. So don't worry if you've not done this before. There are tip clips already available in Semester Plan about how to do this. And I also show you some examples of a sample bibliography at the end of today's lecture. And again, I'll reiterate, if you have any questions at any point, that's absolutely fine. Scribble them down just now and then ask me at the end of the lecture, okay? So if you want to look in a more distilled, a more condensed sense at what I'm talking about today, there are already 2 tip clips that are available via Semester Plan. You can click on these and I talk you through in a more condensed step-by-step practical guide how you actually use the Havia databases and how you can actually use some of the features and functions in academic journals to help you search material. So later on, when I show some screen shares of some actual examples of websites, keep in mind I'm not going to do a step-by-step guide in the lecture because you already have those materials that you can watch in your own time and pause and actually practice for yourself. So you can actually do the searches yourself along with my tip clip. Now, keep in mind this week as well, you've all been forming teams and you're having your first team talk this week. But what I want to really instill from the very beginning is that academic literature and desk-based research is also another member of your team. Okay, so when you're writing your country profiles, the chapter that kind of comprises the biggest part of the course, academic literature and academic sources are a fundamental part of that chapter. A lot of what you'll be doing is paraphrasing and summarizing or even directly quoting at points other people's ideas. So keep in mind, it's not just about the different attributes that you guys have as a team, although that is important. Your success or otherwise is ultimately determined by the extent of the academic literature you can find. Now, obviously, we fully appreciate this will be harder for some countries than it is for others. And perhaps if you're struggling to find academic material on your particular country, then obviously Xander and myself can help with that. But also you might think about trying to get more survey respondents, for example, or more interviewees, because then that helps to reinforce and support some of the arguments that you'll be making about leadership in the countries that you're studying. But academic literature is really fundamental to all of this process. Now, some of you already have, with Xander and myself today, been registered on OneDrive. The remainder of the teams will be doing that on Thursday. So once you do get registered on OneDrive, have a look around at the folders. There's a download folder, for example, that has lots of pre-existing material there about how to ask interview questions, about surveys, and most importantly, it also has some samples of previous versions of the CP. So I know some teams have messaged me on Facebook about this. And yes, there are some examples from previous editions of the book, and I would recommend that you all have a look at them in the download folder on OneDrive. I think it helps you show helps you see how much academic literature you need to draw on, and it also helps you see the types of content that you need to be writing about in each section. And that will be helpful for helping you plan your literature search. Because remember, you're interested in finding out specific things. Okay, we have specific interests, specific concepts and ideas that we want you to explore. So I just want to briefly talk about this aspect because today's session is one of the first parts of what we call the project classes. So primarily, I have all the lectures and have recorded all the videos and tip clips on these specific elements of the course. So in particular, I'll be doing lots of work with you on writing for your country profile. I'll be hosting various CP clinics in feedback sessions, live feedback sessions on each draft, for example. I'll also be giving you live sessions and pre-recorded sessions on interviews, what sorts of questions to ask, how to structure interviews, how to make sure they're done effectively. And I'll also be teaching you on survey, so who the sample group is that we're targeting, how to write appropriately to them, to use correspondence well, how to ensure you get informed consent, basically all aspects of data collection. So that's primarily what I'm helping you with, how to collect the data that you will use to write about your particular country. So there's three different strands: desk-based research and primary research. And today I'll be talking to you about the desk-based component of that. And this is where it is in the subway map. So I'll be doing these things that you can see in green. So citing is next week's class. I'll be talking to you about bibliographies and referencing. But today we're focusing on databases and journals. But essentially, I'll arm you with all the tools, techniques, and knowledge that you need to conduct your own research. And of course, the CP and all aspects of the course begin with textbook. Hopefully, as you saw, textbook is now available. It's all of the issues are completely addressed, so you should now be able to buy it from Study Store. Alternatively, as we communicated, if you have a previous edition, we will also be making available the new chapters to those students as well, and we'll be communicating about that later on in the week. As you can see from Semester Plan, there are already long read PDFs in Semester Plan on how to access journals and databases. So again, if you prefer to read rather than listen to lectures, for example, then you can also read through those two chapters that I wrote and again, follow the step-by-step guides of how to access and find appropriate material. And as I also mentioned earlier, there are tip clips on bibliography and referencing in week 3 of Semester Plan. So if you want to jump ahead, you can already watch those to help you do the task for Friday evening. And there is textbook. Now, keep in mind, as I said in the semester kickoff and the semester overview, it can feel like an awful lot of things you have to juggle. We're fully aware of that. We try to present you with information or kind of drip feed you information on a need-to-know basis in order to not overwhelm you. But what I would say is from the beginning of this week, now that your teams are practically fully formed, please keep in mind that ultimately you're trying to produce a collective book. And I said this to some of the teams I spoke to in Team Talks today, that you will also have access to everyone's folders in OneDrive. And we do that because we have a kind of collectivist ethos here at CCBS. So it's not about competing with one another necessarily. If you do well, then that means someone else does less well. Or if you share, then that means that yours is going to be less unique and special because you've helped other teams. Ultimately, your chapter is only as good as the other chapters that are next to it in the book. If we have 2 or 3 great chapters amongst 20 average chapters, the reality is people will pick up the book and put it down and might never read your chapter. So what you'll be able to do over the course of the next 3 months on your own, and sometimes we will instruct you to do this, is to have a look at other teams' folders. So if I'm giving feedback on the second draft, for example, and I say a lot of teams are struggling with the empathy section, but Team Botswana did a really great job in terms of the content structure of that section, what I would say is I would recommend teams have a look at the Team Botswana's draft of their empathy section to have a kind of concrete visual illustration, perhaps, of how they can improve their work. And again, if theirs gets better, the whole book gets better. Okay, so I just want to explain the rationale behind that. That's why we do it. And again, as we said before, we'd recommend trying to help other teams. If you are a native speaker of a country, but you're not studying a country, then try and help another team. And if you really help them, there's always the potential for additional credits for those who do so. Now, it's a long process for sure. It's not the sort of thing that you'll be writing in a couple of weeks. Rather, you'll be slowly building up, editing, rewriting this chapter for the next 3.5 months or so. So what I would say is that you really need to kind of fall in love with it. You really need to try and immerse yourself in the country that you're studying. And one of the ways in which I'm going to help you do that today is via academic literature. So it's fine to read other kinds of touristy blogs or online materials to help you get a sense of what a country's like, the kind of smell, the taste of a country, so to speak, some elements of its culture. But what we really need you to do is to immerse yourself in these countries via academic scholarship. What have previous academics written about in relation to your country? And then you can think about, okay, how does the data that we've collected this year in spring 2021, how does that link to, correspond to, or contradict what previous scholars have written about before? So what I would say is just read as much as possible and immerse yourself in that. And of course, a big part of that is collaboration. And for many of you, virtual collaboration. Some of you might never meet, of course, in person, which is quite sad. But yeah, this is a really valuable transferable skill in contemporary workforce. So please try and take advantage of it. Although we've asked you to try and allocate specific roles to people in the team, the reality is you will all need to be simultaneously working at times. So we want you to all be responsible for the overall product. It's no use in a couple of months' time saying, well, I'm only responsible for the introduction. It's not my fault that the empathy section is bad. Ultimately, it's a singular piece of work that you will be producing. And I will help you improve the quality of that, but you also need to help each other improve the quality of that. So get to know each other, get to know how each other works and how best you can collaborate with each other, okay? Now, this is the overview of the particular sections that you'll be writing about. I'm not going to talk about these at length at the moment. They're mentioned in textbook, and we will come back to talk about them at various points across the semester. I only show you them now to show you how much you'll need to do, as in how many sections the chapter comprises of. And I also want to show this because in almost all of these sections, almost every single one of these sections, you will be paraphrasing, summarizing, or directly quoting academic literature. So what I want to emphasize is that there isn't just one subsection which is about a review of academic literature and the rest is all your own. Rather, what you'll be doing is bringing together and synthesizing different types of data and knowledge. Academics say this, our survey supports this. However, the two people we've interviewed actually said that it's not quite like this, and actually it's a bit like something else. Okay, so you're telling a story that incorporates different elements. So academic literature is a critical component of that. So the things that I'll show you today, you need to already be steadily working on that from the end of this week onwards. You should have one member of your team who is solely dedicated to systematically searching for relevant materials. Okay, and this is important to do because it's literally the foundation of an interesting, well-written and coherent CP. Okay, quite simply, you can't get a good grade on your chapter, on your country profile, if you don't have good information and knowledge in there. We can't just base things on opinions or experiences of what we saw ourselves. The work we're producing is more academic orientated than that. So the arguments that you make need to be grounded in evidence. And that evidence, as I say, can come from scholars, can come from the people you interview, and also the people that you survey who have practical experience of working in an organization. So the gold standard, so to speak, i.e. the sources that are really like gold to us, what we're really interested in finding is academic literature that has been written by native scholars. So either written in English, which tends to be the case because the English language dominates academia, but also if it's written in the native language, for example. So if you have a native speaker in the group, it's really great to try and get academic sources that are written in the native language by a native scholar. And why do we recommend this? Well, we recommend this above all because a lot of management and business literature, the field, the academic discipline, if you will, tends to be dominated by American scholars. And although a lot of that scholarship is really great, it tends to reflect Western and American centric views of other countries. So it tends to be about applying academic and American and Western concepts, models, frameworks to countries in other parts of the world. So what we'd really like you to do is to try and let the voice of local scholars, local managers, local cross-cultural trainers come to light. Okay, voices that might be underrepresented and underheard within the field of management and business studies. Now, again, this will be easier for some countries more than others. And of course, that's something we take into account when giving you feedback and grading you. Not all teams are equal in that respect. The challenges are different for different teams. So, for example, while some countries might have far more academic literature than others, in some respects that's an advantage, but in some respects that's also a disadvantage, because perhaps we might therefore have different standards for those teams. We might therefore want you to push harder and to push further than simply reciting stuff that has been written hundreds of times before. Okay, so there are advantages and disadvantages depending on what particular country you are studying. Now, what are we actually looking for then, and how might academic literature support that? Well, ultimately, we're looking for flowing, coherent, and compelling narratives. So ultimately, we want it to flow well. We want it to be nice to read, first and foremost. We want someone to be able to pick it up, to treat it seriously, but for it not to be too academic to the point where it's unreadable. Believe me, I've read lots of academic stuff, and some of it is absolutely unreadable, okay? We don't want it to be like that. We want it to be written for a broad readership, but nevertheless for a management readership, okay? We want paragraphs to be well structured, and of course, that's something that I'll be helping you guys with. So I'm the kind of primary proofreader in the course. So I'll constantly be helping you to refine, edit, and tweak your writing, your paragraph structure, your sentence structure, and I'll be showing you lots of hints and tips as to how to proofread and improve your work to make sure that it meets the standard that we're looking for. But the crucial element in relation to today is the final part, and that's this idea of effective synthesis of sources and data. And as I already mentioned earlier, this touches upon the idea that you need to tell a story that draws upon multiple sources. Some that's been written by other people, preferably local scholars, but also data from people who've lived and breathed organizations in the countries you're studying. Denmark, Iceland, Botswana, Russia, Lithuania, whatever it might be, okay? And as I said, one of the ways in which you'll be doing this synthesis is through paraphrasing, summarizing, and occasionally directly quoting academics' work. Okay, so this is a big part of the CP process, is summarizing what other scholars have written about your particular country. In next week's lecture, I'll show you how we would like you to reference and list these scholars' work in your bibliography. Okay, but you don't have to worry about that just now. And as I've already hinted at, just having good academic literature in your CP improves the quality of it. Now keep in mind we're a cross-cultural scholarship and leadership course, so if you are able to identify and find really good material, then that shows that you have a good knowledge, okay, a good knowledge and understanding of key leadership concepts and ideas, and most importantly, are able to apply them to a local context. So this is a good point to mention. Although we want you to summarize academic arguments, we don't want you to be writing at huge length. Hofstede designed his model of blah, blah, blah. This is what the model comprises of. That's not what Xander and I are looking for on this course. What we want you to do rather is to apply those concepts and ideas to your specific country. And by apply, we mean show how that actually plays out in a real organization. Cite examples that illustrate whether a country is hierarchical or not, or whether a country has a high level of power distance, for example, or whether leaders in Lithuania are transformational or transactional. Don't write in great length about what these concepts are. Show us how it plays out in real life, in real organizations, by drawing upon academic literature and summarizing it. So if you do that well, and as well as doing the other components well, you will achieve higher grades. There's no doubt about that whatsoever. That is the same story each and every year. And also above and beyond just grades, because obviously I think there is more to learning than just that. Also, it will really help with your research skills for future. So when you're writing dissertations, for example, we've really found that students who've done this course have a really excellent knowledge and understanding of research methods and also writing, which will stand them instead for far longer than this course lasts. So keep that in mind. A lot of what I'll be teaching you with are skills that you can use for the rest of your academic careers. And in that respect, I would say that how to access journals and databases is the first part of what I would call your academic researcher toolkit. So over the next 3 or 4 months, I'm sure you already have your own tools, but Xander and myself will be helping you by adding more tools to your tool belts. So when you do run into issues, when you do run into problems, for example, you can use these tools via tip clips, lectures, and the long read PDFs and via textbook to help you to solve them for yourself. And as Xander has mentioned several times now, that's really what this course is about pushing yourself to kind of push through challenges, to overcome them. Now, just to show you what the writing process is like, because I know when I kind of started academia a long, long time ago, I always thought it'd be this amazing sort of stream of consciousness. You would sit down and just start like writing away. You would get a bottle of wine and just go, okay, just leave me for 5 hours. I'm going to write this essay. Unfortunately, it's not quite like that. It's a much more systematic process, particularly writing this country profile chapter. So a nice way of looking at it is to split it into chunks. So I would say that 40% of the writing process is actually searching for, identifying, and summarizing what other scholars have written about in your country. 20% is then the writing process, the summarizing, the paraphrasing of that, creating narrative flow and so forth. But crucially, the other remaining 40% is rewriting. And that's really important to keep in mind. Over the next 3 months, you will be rewriting, tweaking, going back over every single section that you've written. Each time we have a deliverable, we ask that you address the comments from previous drafts, from previous team talks. Okay, so there's a lot to keep in mind is what I'm saying. It's not all just writing, it's research and rewriting. And it's also important because this forms some of the marking criteria, of course. So when we're actually marking your country profiles at the end, we have a set of criterion that we apply. And here you can see there are 2 criteria. The text has sufficient references to recommended book sources and also academic journal sources. So again, your ability to identify good material directly factors into what mark you get. Okay. So let's move on to think about how we actually start finding some of those resources. And as I said earlier, keep in mind, there's already tip clips in this where I talk you through in a more practical step-by-step way how to access the Havia website, online library, and online databases. So you can pause, watch them back if and when you want. So I'll kind of skim through some of those materials later, okay? But as you start the process of writing for your CP, what you'll find is something like this. You've got this huge kind of reservoir, very dark reservoir that you can't see into. You think, okay, what do I know about Lithuania? And you might think absolutely nothing, okay? But the reality is you're not going to be able to just sit there and hope that the knowledge on Lithuania is going to come to you. Equally, it's not as easy as just typing Lithuania and leadership into Google and thinking everything I need to know will come back to me in a very straightforward, orderly way in one afternoon. I wish it was, but unfortunately it's not like that. So what you will have to do is to cast your net, like is shown in the picture here. You will have to plan and systematically think about how you're going to identify the sources that you need. And that involves planning, of course. You need to think, okay, what specifically do I need to know about leadership in Lithuania, Denmark, Iceland, Botswana, or whatever it might be? And that's what I'm going to show you today to make that search systematic, more fruitful, and less time consuming. Okay. Now, there are three different elements that you can use. So you can use readers that are on OneDrive. This will help you to get a kind of a superficial understanding of your country to allow you to gain some insight into the culture there, for example. But ultimately, we want you to be using more academic sources in the country profile eventually. So we don't want tourist blogs. We don't want simply newspapers. We don't want things like flight packs and globe spans. We want more academic, rigorous, high quality materials. Okay. And this is the literature cycle wheel again. So the first stage of that, as I mentioned before, is planning. You need to be systematic. You need to really think about what are the key concepts that we need to read. And this is where looking over previous CPs that are on OneDrive can be really useful. They will already show you what some of the main concepts, ideas are that we want you to explore and apply to the country you're investigating. Now, I say systematic as well because it's also really important to make sure that you write down everything that you're searching. Now, hopefully you've already allocated literature search to one or two people in your team. And if you have, that's great. But what's important is you need to be systematic and write down, what have I searched? What databases did I look at? What were the search terms that I used? Because then if you get stuck and you can't find material and you ask someone else in the team to help, you can say, I've looked at these 3-4 databases and I've typed in these 5-6 search terms. And these were the 10 results that I found. That way, someone is able to come in and help you by using different search terms, for example, to see if that generates more results. If you don't do that, then it can just become chaotic. I've looked on Google and I can't find anything. And what then happens is people are just doing the same thing as each other. You have two people scrolling through exactly the same papers and coming to exactly the same results. So that's not helpful for you. So really be systematic. Just write in a Word document what your search terms are and what databases you've searched. Now, I've mentioned Google. Lots of times people might think, yeah, great, databases and journals are cool, Chris, but I'm just going to access Google. And I'm not going to turn around and say, no, that's rubbish, Google isn't any good. The reality is Google is good. But the reality is also is that it doesn't have all of the materials that you're looking for. So in particular, I would say if you are going to use Google Scholar, of course, because that's already a much better resource, which is kind of singularly dedicated to academic sources. So it already gets rid of some of that not so good information that could just be written by me, for example, on a country that I know nothing about. I could post that in Google if I want, and someone else might use that in a CP and think that's relevant. We don't want you to do that, of course. So if you use Google Scholar, that already helps to evaluate some of that material, okay? But be systematic with how you use Google as well. And I'll show you how you can do that later. So in this planning stage, and again, you can use this as your own template. So if one or two of you are doing a search, you could sit down and think, okay, what does our team need to find out? We know we're looking at leadership in Lithuania or Denmark, but what specific aspects of leadership? It's not political leadership, for example, it's business leadership. Again, you might think, what are the key concepts? So in some of the section titles, you'll already see some concepts. Power distance, empathic understanding, for example. And I've already mentioned some particular leadership styles, transformational, transactional, authoritarian, for example. Now, you might think, what search terms will help me find what I need? And I'll show you examples of these in a moment, what search terms are. Again, they're just a way of narrowing the field, of making your search more specific, more refined, makes it manageable for you. And again, what types of information will I need to answer the question? And as I've mentioned before, the gold standard would be localized knowledge, i.e., papers that have been written by academics who are living or perhaps working for universities, research centres, or governmental agencies in the country that you are studying. That's the gold standard, okay? And there are multiple techniques and things that you can use to search and refine your search for those kinds of authors and local knowledge. So at this point, what I'd like to do is just to give you a couple of minutes as a break, so 2 or 3 minutes, and also just try and write down as many synonyms as you can come up with for leadership. So basically, how many other words can you come up with for leadership? And again, the more of these words you can come up with, the more of these you can use as the starting point for your search terms on databases and journals. So just take a couple of minutes, scribble them down in front of you, and then we'll move on, okay? Also, feel free to grab a quick glass of water or tea or that at this point. We'll get started again in a couple of moments, okay? This is where a native speaker can also be useful, because you might want to think about what are some of the native terms for leadership, management, chief executives, chief financial officers, chief operating officers, for example. There may be some cultural and national differences in the terms that are used, which again you can use to refine your search. For those who are watching this in the video format as well, perhaps do this as you go along with the video. Okay, hopefully you've managed to get a few in front of you right now. And again, this is just a starting point. So what you should ideally be doing with your team over the course of this week is to try and identify more of these synonyms for leadership and to use this as the basis for your search terms that you will put into the online databases and also the online journal web pages. Okay. And if you're systematic in this process, you can work your way through these search terms. So perhaps if the term leadership alone brings up too many results, for example, then you might want to think about ways of refining that. And again, it's really nice and useful to be able to say to your teammates, these are the 4 search terms that I've used. Perhaps we need to come up with more because I've found quite limited data so far. And again, it just saves everybody time and it makes it a more time effective and cost effective process. Okay, hopefully you've got that. I'll now go back to the rest of the lecture, okay? So I'll screen share again with you. There we are. Okay, so one of the ways in which you might want to try and develop that, particularly as a team in a kind of virtual online meeting, hopefully you'll be having one of these this week in order to prepare for Friday's task, is you might want to write down some of the synonyms in a mind map and then have various subtopics coming off of them. So perhaps other smaller terms that are associated with that particular synonym. Management, boss, leadership, CEO, COO, CFO, and also native-based terms for particular management positions as well. So first start with developing that mind map or any other kind of technique that people use as well. Now, as I already mentioned last time, having your Havia login is quite important at this point. So if that's still an issue, please get in touch with Astrid Mann, so our secretary. Her email address is in semester plan, and some of you have been in contact with her for other things. So speak to her and make sure that you have that done. If you don't have that, then obviously you might want to allocate the job of finding sources for Friday to someone in the team who has a Havia login already. If not, then you can also perhaps look for academic material on ResearchGate and also Google Scholar. And sometimes some of these sources won't require a Havia login. But certainly over the course of the next 3 months, you need to make sure that you have this because they're password protected. So the information that I'm about to show over the next 2 or 3 slides, I won't go into great detail with it because, as I say, I already provide step-by-step tutorials on how to access the databases and the journals via the Havia online library in the tip clips that I showed you at the beginning. So this is the Havia website. I want to flag up at the very top, the top arrow, you're able to change the language. I'm not sure how many languages are available, but certainly Dutch and English is available. So you can switch it depending on your preference. And as you can see in the bottom arrow, in the bottom of the screen, it also provides 2 links to go to either databases or journals. So keep in mind, databases tend to be big, large online libraries that comprise multiple online books, but also multiple online journal materials, for example. And these journal materials will be published in multiple different journal papers. Okay, so that's the difference between databases and journals. So a journal tends to be one sort of library, if you will. So let's say, for example, Leadership Quarterly, and that will be usually maybe once every 3 months or so, they will have a series of publications included in that one journal. Conversely, databases comprise hundreds of different academic journals. Okay, so I really recommend beginning with databases, and then once you identify perhaps some really good journals, then go to specific journal websites, and I'll show some examples of them later to refine your search. Okay, but again, this is all provided in the step-by-step guide, and similarly, this material is all included in the long read PDFs on OneDrive and also in textbook. So these are some of the examples of what I would say are the kind of top databases for what you guys are looking at here at CCBS. It doesn't mean that these are the only ones that you should look at. I'm just providing a summary or a selection of some of the good databases that you can go to. And again, the Havia subscribes to all these databases. They pay a lot of money for them. So keep that in mind. You guys are also paying for your studies and you're paying for resources like this. So please make use of them, okay? But by all means, try other ones. So I just want to show this page just to show the sorts of different things and the sorts of functions that databases and online websites already make available to you to make your life easier. So at the very top, you'll see that there's a search bar. And in there, you can type some of the different synonyms that I asked you to come up with a minute ago. Okay, so leadership and Botswana, for example, CEOs and Botswana, transactional leadership, Botswana, power distance, hierarchy, Botswana. On the left, you'll see there are also ways in which you can refine your search further. So someone asked in the chat, for example, what types of standard are we looking for? We're looking for the standard of materials that are included on these academic databases and online journals. So these are peer reviewed, and that means that other academics have quality checked this work to make sure that the claims that are made are justified, that the evidence they provide is real rather than being fabricated, and that it meets certain quality standards. So in terms of the materials that we want you to use for your country profiles, these are the sorts of materials you should be selecting. So on the left-hand side of the screen, you can see that there's a tick box to only search scholarly peer-reviewed journals. So that would be a good box to tick, because that's exactly what we're wanting you to look for. Just up above that, there's also a box which is full text. So why is that useful? Because once again, that limits and restricts the search only to those texts that you can access all of it. And what do I mean by that? Well, sometimes you might find a great resource in a database like this, but actually you don't have access to it. And if that happens quite a lot, that can obviously be quite frustrating. So one way to avoid this is to click that full text, and it will only present hits to you that you can directly access. Now, if you follow your eyes a little bit further down, you can see that there are also published date and also publication type. So again, these are other kind of sub options that you can click in order to narrow and refine your search. So if you think back to the boat image I showed, that's really what this is all about. There's so much information and knowledge out there. You need to find tools and use these kind of functions to limit your search, to refine it and narrow it, to make it manageable, to find materials that are relevant for the purposes that you want here in this course. So, for example, there's no point saying, how could we say, that Denmark is an incredibly hierarchical, has an incredibly hierarchical organizational structure, and then you cite an academic reference which is from 1975. Now, hopefully, what would be going through your mind if you read this as a critical reader would be to think, okay, fair point, but that's 50 years ago. Okay, so is the ideas and the arguments and the evidence presented in that paper, is that still valid in 2021, given the amount of societal changes, technological, cultural changes that have occurred through globalization, for example? So again, think of ways of limiting that. You might want to narrow your search to only look for material that has been published in the last 10 years or 15 years, for example, to make sure that the claims, arguments, and evidence that you're citing, there's a probably better chance that they're still relevant to the country that you're studying. Okay? And again, all databases provide very straightforward tick boxes on their main pages that allow you to narrow your search immediately. So again, have a look at my tip clips, read through the chapter on this, and have that beside you as you actually do this for yourself. Now, other academic search engines, which is just another word for databases, also use these things called subjects or tags. And what that means is that they already have a series of categories that already help you to limit your search. So they've basically done some of the initial legwork for you. They've said that we've categorized all the material that is out there into 10 or 12 different subcategories, whether it's leadership, executive attitudes, international business enterprises, and so forth. So again, when you go into databases, have a look for these pre-existing subject tags. Once again, that's a nice way where the organization itself has already limited your search for you to make sure that it's more specific to what you need. And this is what it looks like on Books 24/7, for example. On the right-hand side, where the yellow arrow is pointing to, you'll see that there are already topics or subjects or tags that already refine and limit and reduce the materials that you're looking for. So, for example, you can see that there's an international business subtopic that includes other subtopics within it: business travel, cultural aspects, global economic issues, international business general. So what you might find is it's also useful to look within these smaller depositories, these smaller online libraries, if you will, for information to see if there's anything relevant there for you. Now, Books 24/7 is also a really useful resource because it also does citations, i.e. the bibliography, for you. So I won't say too much about this because I'll talk about this in upcoming lectures. But what you will see if you go to a particular book, so you search for, let's say, Cultures Collide, and you come across this book, which might be quite handy for what you're doing, what you'll see is where the red arrow is there's a citation button. And what this means is if you click on that, it actually produces the bibliography for you. So it actually produces all of the details about that book: the author's initial, the year in which it was published, the publisher of the book, the edition of the book, for example, and also where it was published. And all of these materials, or all of those elements, are what you need to include in the bibliography at the end of your chapter. And in that bibliography, you list all the details for all the references that you specifically used in your chapter. So if you click on that, it already does the work for you. So you can see this and other databases all have this function. You click on the citation, it allows you to click what particular referencing style you're using. So here's the APA 6th edition. There's now an APA 7th edition available, which we will be using this semester as well. So you can click on that, it will then select the APA 7th edition, and it will automatically generate the reference for you. You can then copy and paste that, change the font to make sure it matches the font of the CP, and include that in your bibliography. So keep in mind for Friday, when I'm asking you guys to find 3 academic sources, I would like you to find the citations for those sources, like you see here on the screen in front of you, to copy and paste them from the website and add them in alphabetical order in a separate Word document called Bibliography. But what I'm trying to highlight here is journal websites and also databases themselves already do a lot of work for you. So just take your time and navigate through them. They're wonderful resources in a way. And as I mentioned earlier during the short break, as I said to you guys, also try and use native terms, of course. So my Spanish is terrible, despite the fact my brother speaks fluent Spanish and lives in Spain. But liderazgo, again, I feel ashamed to say it, but that's leadership in Spanish. So if you do have native speakers in your team, or if there are native speakers in other teams who are prepared to help you for credits, they could help you by doing a literature search. They could come up with synonyms for leadership in native language, in Russia, in Polish, in Spanish, whatever it might be. Okay? And again, you can use this on databases and also on Google Scholar, again, to expand your hits and to try and find more local sources, which is the gold standard. Now, in textbook and in the long read PDFs that are available via OneDrive, I have this table here. And I think it's a really useful table that you can basically apply if 2 different things happen. So on the one hand, if you find that your results are too broad and too general, not specific enough to what you're interested in looking at about Lithuanian leadership, for example, then on the left, it gives you a series of techniques and hints that you can use to make your search more specific. So you could use more specific search terms, for example. You could narrow it down rather than just inputting leadership. Try and be more specific. CFO, COO, a native term for leadership, for example. You could also search in narrower fields. So rather than searching anywhere in a paper, for example, which might bring up lots of hits, because the word that you've suggested you're interested in happens to be mentioned in one sentence of a paper, but the rest of the paper has nothing to do with that, that's a waste of your time. So on journals and databases, there are also boxes where you can click, this word needs to be in the title. Because if the word is in the title, then that would tend to suggest that that is what the paper is written about, which means the paper will be more specifically about the thing that you are interested in. You can also apply limits, as I mentioned before. You can set date limits. So just the last 10 years, for example, if you have far too much information. And again, you can limit the information by selecting peer-reviewed, full text, and so forth. Now, conversely, if you have the opposite problem, too few papers, you could use broader subject terms. So if you're being too specific, perhaps you need to broaden things up. You could search in broader fields. So rather than just searching in the title, you could also search an abstract and the full text. So perhaps the whole text might not be interesting to you, but there is 2 or 3 sentences in that paper which you could use in your CP. You could also use things like truncation. And all that means is you add a little star like you see here, so agricult. And what that means is that it would look for all the words that have things like agriculture, and yeah, what else? I can't think of another word now. You know, I think you get the point I mean. So, for example, you could look for things like Spain, Spanish, for example. And similarly, with a question mark, you could look for words like woman and woman, for example. Some papers might have woman in the title, and you're looking for women, and therefore that paper doesn't come up. And that can be quite frustrating. Okay. And also, you can use things like what we call Boolean operators. So these are ands or nots. So you could say, I'm interested in looking for leadership and Lithuania. Or if you keep getting results on Lithuania and Russia, but you want it specifically on Lithuania, then you could select Lithuania, not Russia. And what that means is that you will only get specific papers that only talk about Lithuania rather than talking about Lithuania and Russia or other neighboring countries. Okay? And again, that just helps to refine your search and open up new avenues for you. Now, as I've already kind of hinted at, it's not a one-stop process. So it's not just somebody saying, okay, over the next 2 weeks, I'm going to look for literature, and then what we have, that's it. We move on and we have to do other parts of the CP. No, what you have to do is to keep engaging and keep looking for more material. But obviously, you don't want to just keep doing the same search over and over and over again. So you want to work smart. And one of the ways you can do that, again, is via the help of databases and journals themselves, who give you these incredibly easy options. Now, some of you will be very familiar with using these options for other kind of online activities, for stores and other things that you're interested in. You'll get keyword alerts where certain things are mentioned, for example, that you're interested in. And you can set up similar alerts and similar warnings for academic journals. So say you're interested in finding papers on power distance and Israel, for example. You could set up a keyword alert in a popular database or a popular academic journal. And anytime something's published that includes those two words, Israel and power distance, for example, you will be sent an email saying, hey, there's a paper here that you might be interested in. Okay? And that's really, really useful because it's the equivalent of setting up your fishing rod by the water and then going away. Then you get a text saying, something's biting. Then you can go back and pick it up. So once you've done this, the journals and databases can do the work for you, and they literally bring papers to you. So it's really, really useful tool. So again, on journals and database websites, very easy. Tick that box, set up what terms you're interested in looking for, what the criteria is, and they'll email you when any paper meets that criteria. So this is something you should be keeping going over the next 2-3 months so that your CPs are as up to date as possible. And if we see lots of journals for 2020, 2021, then of course that looks great for your team. And it also really makes sure that the evidence and the arguments that you're citing in your paper are bang up to date and incredibly relevant for what leadership is like in your country now. Now, what you can see here on your screen is just a list of some useful business and management journals. Again, by no means am I saying these are the only ones you should be looking at, or these are the absolute best. I think these are all well-regarded journals, but ideally look to go beyond them. So just use these as a starting point. Now, if you Google these or you type them into the Javier library, for example, you will go to their specific journal webpage. And once again, as I show in the tip clip, you can use the search terms to look for material that is specific to your purposes. Now, these journals, as I say, are much smaller libraries than an overall database. So again, it means that your search is more refined and more specific. And again, be systematic. Tell your friend who is helping you, okay, I've looked at Management Learning Journal and I used these 5 search terms and I produced these 4 hits. And I've taken a screenshot on my phone of those 4 results. Here they are. See if you get anything different. And then you can compare. It takes a little bit of work, but it saves you a lot of effort in the long run and a lot of time. So this is how you can look for leadership journals via the Javier online library webpage. Again, you can type in the names of what you would imagine some journals to be called, leadership, and it will bring up a series of different journal websites that you can click on. And what's great here is they'll even tell you things that are peer reviewed and so forth. Okay, not always, but sometimes they do. And again, if you click on the hyperlinks, they'll take you to those websites, and then you can apply the search terms and the different kind of restricting criteria that I've talked to you about today. So I'll keep this on the screen just now, just for a second or so. You don't have to do this right now, of course, because you will be doing a version of this for Friday in the academic summary and bibliography tryout. But again, this is just a simple step-by-step guide that if you're watching the video later, you can do this for yourself. And again, this also comes from the tip clip and from the relevant textbook chapters on this. Same with this page, just a step-by-step guide, which is already available via the other mediums I've mentioned. And here they are. You can have a look at these tip clips. They were already available. If you click on them, they take you to a much slimmer version of me talking through the academic databases and academic journals and producing more of a condensed step-by-step guide, kind of more practical. This is what you really need to be doing on a step-by-step basis to get materials. And again, Google is fine, but be more systematic in your Googling. So use Google Scholar, for example, and also use some of the Boolean search strings that I was mentioning, such as these ands. So you could say we're interested in looking at leadership and women, or leadership and women and Greece, or we're interested in leadership and power and Lithuania, leadership and hierarchy and Ghana, for example. Okay. And again, that will help to refine your search. The other things that you can do are on the left-hand side. You can set a time limit again. You can set a custom range. Okay, we only want to see material from the last 10 years. You can sort them by order of date. You can sort them by order of relevance. You can even sort them by the amounts of times that they've been cited by other academics. Now, if they've been cited the most, then that means that the arguments that they make are the most credible, usually, and also the best resources. Okay, and in the very bottom left, hopefully you can see there's also a create alert function for Google Scholar. So again, you set the criteria, what kind of papers you're interested in looking for, and then Google Scholar will alert you every time something new is published. So I really recommend trying to already have done that by the end of this week. It's very simple to set up, but it really pays dividends for you because you can sit back and let Google Scholar do the work for you. Now, what's really good is once you find that really good paper. So often, of course, people struggle at first sometimes trying to find material, depending on the country, of course, that they're studying. But as I always say, all it takes is one really great paper. So that great paper can sometimes help you to understand what you should be looking for. It helps you go, now I see. This paper really sums up exactly what we're interested in doing. And then you can change your search terms, refine your search to look for material which is closer to that. But there are also some other simpler things that you can do to turn one paper into 5 papers into 10 papers, and so on and so forth. And that is, if someone has written about leadership in a particular country, the odds are they've written about it a lot. So once you find one good paper, it's very simple. Just Google the author or the authors and have a look and see what else they've published. Sometimes they'll have a list of publications on Google. Sometimes you can go to their professional, often university website, click on their name. All universities will have a publication section for each staff member, and they'll have a list of their publications in alphabetical or date order. And they say, this is everything that I've published on leadership in this country. So you can find additional materials that way. Sometimes they'll also have a ResearchGate website, kind of academic Facebook. Again, they'll list their publications there and sometimes share their papers there for free. Okay, so it's a really easy, simple way of accessing material. Given that you also need to do an interview with a scholar in the country you're studying, it can also be a nice way of identifying a potential interviewee. And when you interview them, you could say, we're looking for more material. Do you know of any other resources? And the chances are, of course they will, because they write about it. So this is an example of the sorts of things from Trinity College in Dublin of a particular academic. And again, their list of publications. And this is very typical on all university websites. Lots of up-to-date information. It's a very important part of academia, remember, is publishing and promoting publishing. So almost all staff members will have a list of their publications. And then you can have a look for it on Search Direct or via any of the other databases that I've shown you today. You can look for those papers and see if the Havia has access to them. And again, you get a full PDF, download it and save it, put it in your bibliography folder. Here's ResearchGate, exact same scenario. List of publications, the amount of citations they've had, the amount of times it's been read, and crucially, these links to the research papers and also links about whether the full text is available or not. They're really great resources nowadays, far better than even 15, 20 years ago when I was first starting to research. Now, the other really easy thing, but believe it or not, so many people don't do it, is if you find that one really good paper, go straight to their bibliography. Go straight to the end of their paper and see what other authors have they cited in order to provide evidence or justify arguments that they make in their paper. So the list in the bibliography is then a list of potential sources that you can look for, scan through to see if they're relevant to your particular country. And then you can rinse and repeat the process I've just told you about. You can then look for their university or ResearchGate website page, find more publications that they've done, then download those, then look at their bibliography, find other authors. So hopefully now you can already see the snowball effect that happens once you get those one or two good papers, okay? And again, as I mentioned before, it's also good to try and find native sources. Now, Xander has a particular tip clip dedicated to this, so I won't go into that, but specific hints, tips, step-by-step guides of how to access native sources in native language. But what I will just draw your attention to is, again, just the functions that are available already on databases and websites. So as you can see here, there's a tab that allows you to search for papers in a particular language. So if you're studying a Spanish-speaking country and you're interested in leadership there, you can also choose to search for Spanish literature if you have a native speaker in your team. And again, you can translate and summarize and translate into English the key findings from those papers. If you are able to do that, that looks really great for your team. Now, to conclude today's lecture, I just want to reiterate what we're wanting you to do for Friday. Hopefully now you can see the ways in which some of the things I've talked to you about today directly tie into what I'm asking you to do for Friday. So just to go over that again, I want you to identify 3 relevant academic peer-reviewed papers using the techniques and the tips that I've shown you today and that are also in the tip clips and online readers. Download these as PDF files. Again, on the websites themselves, they show you, click here to download as a PDF. Save these, put them in the bibliography folder on your OneDrive team page that will show you just now. Next to that, a Word document that gives the bibliography for these 3 sources. Again, websites themselves will directly produce them for you. Very easy. Put them in alphabetical order. And the third document, which is 2 or 3 sentences summarizing the main findings from those papers. You don't have to go into detail, just give a very rough idea. Why do you think these papers might be interesting to help you gain insight into the country you're studying? So this is a sample bibliography. This is what will be at the end of all of your chapters. And again, there's a nice selection here of how to reference journal articles, books, interviews, websites, and so forth. So if you want to do the bibliography manually rather than using the automatic citation production, then you can copy and paste these examples and simply find the details on your own articles. So you can change the name, but you see where the commas go, you see where the full stops go, you see where the year goes, how the title should be written, the fact that the title should be italicized and so forth. So use these templates. We make available a lot of templates for you guys over the semester. So make it easy for yourself by using these good best practice examples that we provide and just changing them accordingly. Okay, it saves you so much time at the end. And again, if you want to see how to do that practically in more detail, jump ahead to next week and you'll see on Monday, 15th of February, there are already tip clip hyperlinks that you can click on where I talk you through what a bibliography is and how to reference in your CP. And in next week's lecture, that will be specifically dedicated to talking about that in more detail. Okay, there's also examples in textbook, once you have that shows you how to reference in the text and also how you then reference that text in the bibliography. Again, in the end, again, I'll be showing you this next week, so you don't have to worry about it. But I'm just showing you the pre-existing materials that are there to help you. Now, on Friday, this is ultimately where we want you to put those different things that I've been talking about. So once you're in OneDrive, you'll see in your team country profile folder, there's a bibliography folder. So you click on that, and inside we want to see 3 PDFs a Word document with the bibliography, and a Word document with the summary of those 3 papers. Okay? And after the lecture today, once I post up the recording of the lecture, I'll also be posting what we call a best practice summary phrase bank. And all that is examples of sentences from previous semesters of how people talk about research, introduce research, summarize research, and how they synthesize it in their CPs. So these are just 3 examples that I've taken from the longer version, but I'll be posting the document up on Facebook along with the digital version of the lecture later. So again, read over that in your own time, use these templates and kind of incorporate them into your own writing. They just give you some different options and some different ways of introducing research, talking about research, how to reference it properly, and so on and so forth. So as I say, have a look at that later when I post it and use that for Friday, okay? This is also another phrase bank, it's a really good resource that comes from the University of Manchester. So this will be useful for throughout the CP. It shows you different ways and different example phrases for how to introduce examples, how to cite academic research, how to cite supporting arguments for the points that you're making. So follow that link in your own time. I will show it again in future lectures. And with that, if you haven't already, of course, the other resource for all of these things that I'm talking about is the textbook, which is available now. And with that, guys, I will wish you a very happy day. Thank you so much for joining me today. As I mentioned at the beginning, if you have any questions, please post them at the bottom of the Facebook post later when I put up the video. Alternatively, if you want to hang around after the recording is finished to ask me a question, please do. Okay? Otherwise, have a lovely day, everybody, and see you soon.